Hey, everybody. I'm coming to you from my home office in stately Simpson Manor tonight. You probably came here from the Cautious Optimism site on Facebook, and welcome. I usually, if you've read my columns there, I usually have a focus on humor and talk about politics or culture or music or whatever. Tonight, I just got a little rant I want to get off my chest. There's an issue that's been bothering me, so I thought I'll see if anybody cares about this or watches it or whatever. So if I were to ask you, what is the bane, as a conservative, what's the bane of your existence? I probably would get a whole bunch of different answers. The late Joe Biden, Grandma Squanto, soccer, my terrible marriage. You're going to have a bunch of different potential answers. For me, what's been bothering me lately, the word rhino. And we all know what that is. I think RINO stands for Republican in name only. And it's almost always going to be somebody who talks a good game. They act like they're really conservative. They get elected, and at the first bit of pressure or pushback from the left, they cave, and we get nothing, and we're outraged. And always dissatisfied conservatives in the Republican Party. And I think of one great example. God bless him, the late George H.W. Bush, a war hero. A lot of good things about him, but boy, was he the perfect example in 1988. He's running after 8 years of being Reagan's vice president, and there's the famous convention speech, and he says that Democrats are going to come after me, and they're going to say we have to have more taxes, and I'm going to say no new taxes, and they're going to push again, they're going to say no new, and they're going to push again, and I'm going to say it with me, betrayed Republicans, read my lips, no new taxes. The place goes nuts. He wins the election. 17 minutes later, the Democrats push a little bit, and he collapses like a house of cards. And thus, Bill Clinton is halfway to elected right away. Poor Mitt Romney, he was running, and people were saying he's a rhino, which obviously he is. And he objected, I'm a severe conservative. I'm severely conservative. And every real conservative face palmed, because they would never say, one thing a real conservative would never say is that we're severely conservative. So there's a long, rich history. And I actually had this going into Trump's campaign in 2016. I was worried that he was a rhino. I favored Ted Cruz in that one. I still am impressed by him. I think he's a conservative guy. He's been one of the more conservative people and consistent and principled. And before and after his election, he's kind of been there. But I was worried about Trump. I saw the charm and everything else, but I was a little bit worried because I think, again, if you've never had office before, the rhino red flags are raised for me. And I think for Trump, in my defense, if you look back a lot of his record up till then, I think could be red flag, rhino, classical rhino red flags. He'd been a Democrat for years and years, and then he became an independent, then a Republican, then back to independent, then back to Republican. He'd had the kind of sketchy bouncing around kind of past. He'd been doing business in New York, so I think you can sort of get him off the hook a little bit, because if you do business in a big blue city like that, you're constantly having to swim in that fetid swamp with Hillary Clinton and Schumer and all those people. So the fact that he had donated more money to Democrats than Republicans for about a 20-year period before 2010 or 11 or something like that, that's a red flag. It's not definitive, obviously, but that's not a good sign. He was pretty mushy. I think he was pro-choice. Just a lot of things to worry about with Trump when he first ran. And in fact, he turned things around with me when, if you remember, I think it's the Federalist Society, but some conservative judicial group, think tank kind of thing, put together a list of a dozen or 24 judges, federal judges, and said that if a Republican gets elected and he has a chance to fill an opening in the Supreme Court, this would be a great list of people to pick from. And Trump grabbed that list to his credit and said, I promise I'm going to pick, if I get a chance, if I'm elected and get a chance to fill the seats on the Supreme Court, I'm going to use some of these people. So I felt a lot better at that point. I was, of course, going to vote for him because he's running against the worst woman in the history of women, Hillary Clinton. But I felt a lot better once he did that, because I felt like even if he doesn't have a conservative background or he hasn't a lot of bona fides to kind of stand on, at least I think he's doing the right thing here. And I thought I was pleasantly surprised. If you followed in my writing, I was pleasantly surprised by his presidency. At least the first 3 years, I thought it was way more conservative than I expected, than I had the right to believe after all being let down for all those years by other presidents. And even the fourth year, I think he made two big mistakes, and I don't judge him too harshly for these necessarily. They're easier in retrospect. You can always Monday morning quarterback. But the two big ones, the one that surprised me the most, the way he handled the riots after George Floyd in May of 2020, that orgy of 6-7 months every night in dozens of cities all around the country, Democrat run cities, all of them. But mobs of leftist writers and so are apolitical writers too, Antifa and Black Lives Matter primarily, but a bunch of just scumbags that jump onto movements like that, looting and rioting and burning down whole city blocks and attacking police departments. You know, the whole $4 billion of damage, 24 murders, night after night, week after week. I just thought if I could take you back in a time machine and said President Trump, rowdy, punch throwing President Trump is going to have this happen. How do you think he's going to react? A, lead right into that thing right away, have a national primetime speech. If the rotten Democrat governors and mayors of these towns will not stop this kind of thing, I'm going to, because America does not put up with this. There's no reason we should have our great cities being tormented by these people. I'm calling out the National Guard in all 48 lower states starting tomorrow. We're going to bring law and order. There's going to be mass arrests. We are not going to tolerate this. I am not going to be the president that stands by and watches our cities destroyed like that. Is that not the most Trumpy thing you would expect? It just seems like that. And so I was kind of shocked and of course disappointed, just month after month of passively, I mean, rhetorically saying some stuff and making an issue of it in the election. But he could have called out the National Guard. He could have really gone full Trumpy on it, and he didn't. The other one is the COVID thing. And again, I give everybody grace. The first couple months, I think, were tough. The medical establishment, boy, have they ever earned the distrust from the American people that they have now. They were so bad. And there were good people in there, but boy, the leadership and stuff. And we all know about Fauci and lying about it was funded, it was gain of function. It was funded partially by us. It did come out of the Wuhan lab, all that stuff. Masks didn't help. Everybody wasn't equally at risk. You remember the first couple of weeks or months, the death estimates were 5 or 6 or 8% fatality rates of it, and that started ratcheting down. After data came in, all that stuff got better, and they started backing off of it. So I give people a lot of kind of grace about this. I'm a DeSantis supporter primarily, and I've been a Floridian for a long time. I've watched him govern. I think he's been a great governor, and he did go along with a little bit of that early on, as I think almost everybody did. But he started pretty quickly pushing back. I think the South Dakota governor pushed back more consistently earlier, but in her defense or his defense or whatever, there's 27 people in South Dakota. There was safe distancing just by being, no offense to any South Dakotans out there, but you're already safely distanced if you live in that state, one person per 5 miles or whatever. Anyway, I thought everybody I gave him, and Trump too, I wouldn't hold him responsible. But as the summer started to go on, and as the data came in, and the death rates clearly weren't 6%, they clearly weren't 0.5%, they weren't, they were way, whatever they ended up being, 0.03 or 0.003 or something. And it was all really old people or compromised people dying. Those are precious lives and everything else. But we know COVID was not what we had feared and what we've been told. As that year went on, I still don't understand why he put an ad out in October, the month before the election, snuggling up to Fauci with Fauci clips from Fauci's speeches saying the president followed all of my recommendations. When I said we should have masks, he didn't fight me on that. When I said we should have lockdowns, he supported me on that. President Trump has been a good president because he's listened to the science. That was the basic kind of thing of it. And that's October. That's 7-8 months after this thing started. And the last day he was in office, to pile on a little bit more, the last day he was in office, they had a kind of ceremony at the White House where you hand out a bunch of awards to 20 or 30 people, high profile people. And 2 of the people he gave awards to were Dr. Scarf, whatever her name was, Fauci's white right-hand woman on COVID, and Fauci himself. So no excuse for that stuff. I'm not using this term to insult Trump, but he had 2 big calls to make that year, and he took the more Rino one on each one of them. Still, God bless him, he was the most conservative president, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, you might guess by now, the reason that's really been irritating is to see Trump supporters calling DeSantis a Rino, and that's just been stuck in my craw, and I just feel like I'm going to rant for a couple of minutes about it and get this off my chest. But I know DeSantis, it looks like that his campaign has not gone as I hoped it would. I've not completely lost hope, but it's pretty grim for him. And I'll obviously vote for Trump if he gets a nomination, everything. I'll vote for him, even if he's in prison. I don't think there's no legitimate conviction he's going to have, so I would still vote for him. But I just have this terrible feeling that we're making a mistake about that. But that's another issue. But on the Rino thing, I just think DeSantis, any honest person has to say, you look at his record for 5 years. He's not Vivek, who's never got elected anything. You can say, well, I think he might get to Washington and collapse and compromise and everything else. Well, he's got a 5-year, if he's doing that, he is doing the long con. And he is, for 5 years, he's been the most conservative governor in my lifetime in any state. And just a couple quick talking points and evidence for that. The Disney thing is obvious, one of the biggest, most beloved corporations until they went all woke and started grooming people and having the not so secret gay agenda and all the stuff that you've heard about. A Rhino governor never would have messed with them. Disney's worth billions of dollars of revenue to the state of Florida every year. And they're, no one wants to have the picture of them in a cartoon, giving a head rub to Mickey Mouse or something like that. That's a brave thing to do, to attack that company, to get rid of their corporate welfare, to challenge them on that and fight them in the courts and everything else. That is a major non-Rhino thing to do, opposite of Rhino thing to do. 2 Soros-funded prosecutors. The last one was an African-American woman. I can't remember about the first one, but boy, a Rhino governor, if you said she's an African-American woman, just radioactive for us to do anything, you're going to be called racist and sexist. He fired both of them when they acted against their charter and against what the people of the state put them there to do and to follow the laws. They did not do it. And DeSantis fired both of them, and God bless him. That is the opposite of Rhino. Obviously, the COVID thing, he was called Death Santis. He opened up really early and gave people the freedom to choose masks or something like that. That he did a great job at that. And he was called all the things you would expect, Death Santis and everything else. Flying the people to Martha's Vineyard. I thought that's the Trumpiest thing I've ever heard anybody besides Trump do. Took a bunch of illegals that shouldn't be here, put them on a, could you not see Trump doing that? He'd be standing there with his arm, his hands on his hips, waving at the plane as it leaves Florida, as it takes off to go to Martha's Vineyard. So obviously that was, again, a Rhino would never do that kind of a stunt that's going to bring the wrath of the Northeast establishment down on his back. And the last thing is academic. Everybody knows that I've been a professor until last year when I retired. I've been an academic since the dinosaurs. I can't believe the things he's done, how strong he's been against the bad academic ideas and stuff. That when New College in Sarasota is a real lefty liberal arts kind of college, DeSantis actually went in and kicked a couple people off their board who were far left lunatics, replaced them with a couple common sense kind of conservative guys. And my jaw's still on the ground about that. I can't believe that anybody stood up to a college that way. I still get the emails from the faculty union at my university, and they are up in arms. I never would have thought that academic leftists could hate anybody more than Donald Trump. They hate Ron DeSantis more than Donald Trump. I can't believe it. And he's still banning CRT, that evil kind of anti-white, just racism and lying about America, hateful kind of stuff. He has banned that. He's made that illegal. He's been fighting on all fronts, the DEI stuff and the critical race theory stuff. He's done the opposite of what a Rhino is. So again, I know this is on my chest. If you're a Trump fan, God bless you. I don't think it's smart to be always Trump any more than never Trump, although never Trump is much worse because then you're basically pro Hillary or whatever. But I just think attack DeSantis for everything else. Maybe he ate pudding with his fingers or whatever weird story you're coming up with or whatever. But that man is not a Rhino, and saying that is going to make it harder for a lot of people that aren't as committed to conservatism as I am to vote for your man when the time comes around. Okay, rant over. I hope I just didn't make too many people too furious. I'll talk to you again soon.